All right, so get this, tiny changes, super small, can lead to some really big results. And that's the whole idea behind Atomic Habits by James Clear. We're going to take a deep dive into it today, but we're not just talking about forming any old habits. We're talking about understanding the science behind them, like how about they work. Clear lays out this concept of the 1% rule, and it's pretty mind-blowing. Imagine adjusting your course by just a tiny degree, like a pilot making a minuscule shift. At first, it doesn't seem like much, but over time, that tiny change can lead you to a totally different destination. That's the power of the 1% rule applied to our habits. It's these small improvements, but they got to be made consistently. They compound over time. It's not like, those drastic overnight changes. It's about those little, almost invisible shifts that make a big difference. So then how do we build these better habits? Well, Clear gives us this really cool framework. He calls it the 4 laws of behavior change. Basically breaks down the habit building process into 4 stages: cue, craving, response, and reward. Okay, think about your morning routine. What gets you to brush your teeth?
Maybe seeing your toothbrush, the taste of toothpaste, or just knowing you'll feel fresh afterward. That's your cue. It's like the trigger. It kickstarts the whole habit loop. So to make a new habit stick, Clear suggests this cool trick. It's called habit stacking. Basically, you piggyback off an existing habit, you link a new one to it. Let's say you want to start meditating. Instead of trying to carve out a whole new time slot, you could try tacking on just 5 minutes of meditation, like right after you have your morning coffee. Your coffee routine kind of becomes that cue for your meditation. But just a cue alone isn't always enough, right? There needs to be a craving, a desire that kind of pushes you towards that habit. How do we make a habit something we actually want to do? Well, one way is through something called temptation bundling. Let's say you got to work out, but it's like pulling teeth to get yourself motivated. Why not combine it with something you actually enjoy? Maybe you only allow yourself to listen to your favorite podcast while you're on the treadmill. Suddenly, that workout becomes way more appealing. Next comes the response, the actual action you take. Here's where making things super easy comes in. Clear talks about this 2-minute rule. You basically break down your desired habit into this mini version that takes less than 2 minutes. Instead of going for a 30-minute run, just put on your running shoes and step outside. Once you've nailed that 2-minute version consistently, then you slowly ramp it up. It's all about building that momentum and celebrating those little wins. And then finally, there's the reward. It's that satisfying payoff that keeps you coming back for more. Clear stresses the importance of immediate rewards because they create this positive feedback loop. Could be, tracking your progress, enjoying a healthy snack after a workout, or just acknowledging that sense of accomplishment. Give yourself a pat on the back. It's about reinforcing those positive behaviors. So we've covered the 4 stages of the habit loop: cue, craving, response, and reward. But now let's dig a little deeper into how we can actually make those changes stick. Because, knowing the theory is one thing, but putting it into practice is where the real magic happens.
So stay tuned as we explore some practical strategies for making those atomic habits a part of your everyday life. It's all about those small, consistent actions that add up to big results over time. So let's keep going and see how we can turn this knowledge into lasting change. We'll be right back after a quick break. All right, so we talked about how powerful those tiny tweaks can be, right? Those 1% improvements that really add up over time. But how do we make them actually stick? Well, one strategy Clear talks about is all about the environment around us. Think at it, like if you're surrounded by unhealthy snacks, it's going to be so much harder to resist those cravings. But what if, you make a conscious effort to keep healthy snacks, front and center? Suddenly you're setting yourself up for success and you don't even realize it. Clear suggests making those desired habits more visible, more accessible. Like let's say you want to read more. Leave a book on your bedside table or maybe a stack of magazines in the living room. Make it easy, make it tempting. On the flip side, if you're trying to cut back on something, make it, less visible, less convenient.
Like if mindless scrolling is your weakness, what if you try moving your phone to a different room? Or even putting it in a drawer when you're not using it? It's all about those little nudges, those little nudges in the right direction. But now, beyond just our physical space, Clear talks about something even more interesting. Identity-based habits. It's this idea that lasting change often comes from shifting our mindset. It's about seeing ourselves as the type of person who embodies those desired habits. Okay, so let's say you want to become a regular runner. Instead of just setting a goal of running a certain number of times a week, what if you try shifting your self-perception? Start thinking to yourself, I am a runner. It might sound a little silly at first, but that subtle change in language, it can actually make a huge difference. When you identify as a runner, you're way more likely to prioritize it, to invest in the right gear, maybe even seek out other runners, become part of that community. It becomes part of who you are, not just something you're trying to do. Speaking of staying on track, Clear is a big believer in tracking our habits. Those visual trackers, like habit calendars, even just a simple spreadsheet, they can be super helpful. Seeing those successful days, stacking up, can be incredibly motivating. It's like a visual reminder of your commitment, your progress. Plus, it helps you spot patterns. Maybe you notice that you always skip your workout on Fridays or something. Well, that's valuable information, right? It tells you that maybe you need to adjust your schedule. Or maybe you need to find an activity that you actually enjoy more on Fridays. But, let's face it, even with the best intentions, we all slip up sometimes. The key is to not let those setbacks, completely derail us. Clear encourages us to embrace failure as part of the process. Think of those slip-ups as feedback, not like, a sign of failure. They're telling us that something in our system isn't quite working. Maybe our cue isn't strong enough, or maybe the reward isn't motivating enough. It's an opportunity to adjust, refine our approach. Remember, progress isn't always a straight line. There will be ups and downs, plateaus, and even moments of frustration. That's totally normal. The key is to keep going, keep learning, and keep tweaking those tiny habits, until they become part of who you are. Now, one last powerful strategy Clear talks about is this idea of habit shaping. It's kind of like, think of it like training for a marathon, right? You wouldn't go from 0 to 26 miles overnight. You'd start with shorter distances. You'd gradually build up. Well, the same applies to building any habit. Start small. Make it manageable, and slowly increase the difficulty or maybe the complexity over time. If you're trying to meditate regularly, just start with like 5 minutes a day. Once that feels comfortable, bump it up to 10 minutes, then 15. It's all about those gradual steps. They help you build consistency. They make that habit stick for good. So we covered a ton in our deep dive into Atomic Habits, right? Exploring these tiny changes and how they can lead to, well, some pretty incredible transformations. But as we kind of wrap things up, Clear leaves us with some pretty thought-provoking ideas that kind of go beyond just our individual habits. He talks about this fascinating concept. He says we should focus on systems, not just goals. Now, goals are important. Don't get me wrong. They give us direction, something to aim for. But Clear argues that a lot of times we get so fixated on that end goal that we forget about the process, the system that actually gets us there. Like imagine you want to write a book. The goal is to have that finished manuscript, right? But the system, that's all about your daily writing habits, the research, the editing, all the little things that build up to that final product. And Clear's point is that when you build a solid system, well, the results kind of take care of themselves. It's like setting up this domino effect where each tiny habit triggers the next one, and it leads to those bigger accomplishments. Now remember those identity-based habits we were talking about? Well, Clear takes it a step further. He encourages us to think about the type of person we want to become. Not just the habits we want to form. He challenges us to ask ourselves, what values do we want to embody? What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? It's about aligning our habits with our deepest values, our aspirations. And when we do that, well, those habits become more than just actions. They become expressions of who we are at our core. And finally, Clear reminds us that this whole journey of building better habits, of becoming the best versions of ourselves, it's not always easy, right? There will be those setbacks, those moments of doubt, times when you just want to give up. But that's where resilience comes in. It's about embracing those challenges, learning from your mistakes, and getting back on track. Clear even suggests that instead of fearing failure, we should see it as valuable feedback. It's an opportunity to adjust our systems, tweak our habits, and get even closer to our goals. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Atomic Habits, I want to leave you with this. Start small, stay consistent, and never underestimate the power of those tiny 1% improvements. Embrace the journey, learn from those stumbles, and keep striving to become the best version of yourself, one atomic habit at a time.